I'm Jill Pruetz. I am a professor of anthropology. I'm actually the Walvard Professor of Liberal Arts and Sciences. I am a biological anthropologist, and my specialty is primatology here at Iowa State. It's really interesting because actually I'd say the field of primatology has been somewhat divided, especially in recent years, about lethal aggression in chimpanzees, and there are very few animals other than humans that have lethal aggression like you see in chimpanzees. And so there are sort of two camps, I guess, if you want to dichotomize it. And so scientists that think probably human impacts can explain much of the lethal aggression, and then scientists that maintain that it is an adaptive strategy. And so what's unique about this paper is that we have data from every site. Basically, I'm pretty sure every site that is available. We've pooled data and now can look at it on sort of a broad level. We have a big enough sample in order to test those hypotheses. The significance is that it doesn't support the human impact hypothesis. It supports the adaptive strategy hypothesis. I mean, ultimately, we'd like to have data actually on reproductive success. That's always a problem with animals like chimpanzees that can live for 50 years even in the wild. So it does support the adaptive strategy. But again, you'd like to have data that go a little bit further. But I'd say that it most definitely causes us to rethink the human impact hypothesis. That doesn't seem to be the best explanation or a very good explanation. It's interesting because what we did in this paper was we lumped infanticide, which is killing of infants, and other types of lethal aggression. And there are different explanations for those events, but the human impacts hypothesis sort of lumps them together as those could be abnormal behavior. So that's why they were lumped in this paper. But for infanticide, you see that in other primates besides chimpanzees. Lethal killing of adults is very rare in other animals in general. And so with killing of infants in chimpanzees and in other species, there are different assumptions. So it's usually done, the targets are usually young infants. And what it does is it causes the mother to come back into estrus, and she's able to conceive more quickly than she would if that infant would have lived and been weaned. So with chimps, that's a 4 or 5 year process, the interbirth interval, but between successive births. So that is seen as an adaptive strategy by an infanticidal male. So he's increasing his own reproductive success by killing infants that are not his. So that's another assumption. And again, we don't have all these data, but they support that pattern in chimpanzees and other primates as well, like gorillas. With killing of adults, that is really rare, and like I said, in most animal species besides humans. And so that also, though, can be seen as a strategy to increase reproductive success, but maybe more indirectly. So, and there's some data from some of these chimp sites that support that hypothesis. So Ngogo is this chimp community in Uganda, and it's a huge chimp community, and they have a huge number of males. And what they've seen is that that the males of one community are actually able to increase their home range. And there are probably more lethal events there than at any other site. So they're able to increase their home range. It's thought that translates into reproductive success for these males because they have better access to foods and more females, access to more females. So that's another type of adaptive strategy, a little bit different from the strategy it has to do with infanticide. In the paper, density was also a predictor of lethal events, and and to be the devil's advocate, so someone from the human impact side, you might say that the densities we see today reflect human impact, and so it's really hard to account for the way we have shaped chimpanzee communities in the last 100 years or so, because we know that chimps have drastically reduced in numbers. So what we're seeing is perhaps an artificial type of situation. so I think that would be a criticism, for example, but that's something that would be really difficult to assess. Basically, Jane Goodall's site at Gombe is the longest running chimpanzee research study, and it's been ongoing for more than 50 years, but we don't have the type of data that would be needed to address that type of topic. But I imagine there'll be some criticisms. I think on some levels, it definitely has given us insight into how to manage chimpanzee populations that are semi-free ranging, for example. When you do have, even though human disturbance didn't account for the lethal aggression that you see across the chimpanzees, the study sites, that we have data for, significant human disturbance could cause some sort of disruption that might end up causing lethal aggression. So at my site, for example, in Senegal, what you see right now is this really significant influx of people from all over West Africa because of the gold rush. And so you have people coming in, they're disturbing parts of the habitat that are important for chimpanzees. You have situations like one of my PhD students was working at a site, and the population of the village went from around 100 people to around 10,000 people. So if you have some sort of human influx like that, the chimps don't have much of a choice, so they're probably going to have to move. If they move into another community's home range, then something is going to happen, and not all the chimps are going to be able to survive. They may hang on for a number of years, but that sort of information, I think, gives us an idea of some of the problems that could be caused by really drastic habitat disruption, and that's not uncommon, I think, across Africa to have significant habitat destruction these days. I just on an exchange with the lead author, Mike Wilson, who organized basically the entire study. He commented that it really was quite, it is significant to have everyone work together, especially because you have a number of differing opinions, especially I'd say on this topic, it's been one that's been pretty controversial for the last, 15 years or so, especially. And so I think to have everyone, basically volunteer their data as part of this study, I think was a really good example of how scientists should collaborate. And it does then allow us to come away with a better understanding. So previously, some of the problems were that you did have a pretty small sample size. This is still a pretty small sample size. It translates into about one lethal event every 5 years in terms of observer years, right? So it's not common like it is in humans, say. But it's a bigger sample size. You can statistically analyze it. I think that I think it's a great example of science. I think that there's still more that could be done, but I think everyone's come away with it with a very positive attitude. And Mike had commented that we should continue to do this type of work on other projects. And there has been some similar type of collaboration done with chimpanzee culture studies in the past. But yeah, I think I was. I hate to say surprised, but I maybe was a little bit surprised to have everyone, I think almost every chimpanzee study site and bonobo study site that is ongoing that has been ongoing for a certain amount of time was involved. So that's pretty significant, yeah. For me, one thing that I really am interested in as far as the study goes is the fact that you do have differences between East African chimps and West African chimps, and bonobos as well, but for example, the finding that bonobos differ significantly from chimpanzees in terms of lethal aggression was significant regarding East African chimpanzees, but not West African chimpanzees. And so I study West African chimpanzees, and the longer I study them, the more I find myself agreeing with this premise that they are different from chimpanzees. They're not more similar to bonobos, but they fall along a continuum between chimpanzee and bonobo that I think is important to stress, whereas we usually sort of characterize chimpanzees as being, the aggressive killers, and I'm not sure this paper will do anything to remedy that, but at any rate, and bonobos are the peace-loving apes, and really it is a continuum. West African chimps are in there somewhere, but to me that's something that's really significant. The thing is, we do have just a handful. Well, actually, I think we had 3 study sites in West Africa. We've got just a handful of bonobo study sites, but the number of bonobo years is about a quarter of what we have for chimps. So I think, over time we can get more information from those study sites. The thing is that because of the conservation situation, that it's a pretty sort of dismal outlook in many ways. I think we'll continue to get some good data. I'm not sure there'll be that many more projects initiated. But for me, I was really intrigued to see that difference between East and West African chimpanzees, and that's just sort of supported what I continue to see as a pattern that I hope to continue to explore.